Welcome, welcome to Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. I am your host, Megan, and my amazing co-host is...
Hi, I'm Amanda.
Hello. We
Hey.
are your source for messy, imperfect homeschool advice and community, and we are so glad you're here.
Yes, welcome. You can settle in and relax here. Our vibe is super casual. At least that's what we try for. Look, let's be real. We are too tired to put on shiny, perfect influencer personas. And really, all that does is make people feel like they can't measure up. And I mean, first off, who needs that, right? But also, we've got a pretty solid handle on this whole homeschool thing. We've both been doing it for a whole bunch of years, but that does not change the fact that we still have bad days. And any homeschool guru who is going to show up on your feed with nonstop sunshine and rainbows and matching outfits and always a clean home, they're full of crap. I'm putting that out there. I'm calling it right here, right now.
100%. Like you said, we have a solid rhythm going. Our respective kids are rocking life, which is amazing, but it is not all sunshine and rainbows. Sometimes we lose our shit. Sometimes there are tears. Sometimes we enter a new developmental phase and we need a buddy to talk through and make some decisions. Although I do feel like a bit of a phony today. I feel like you've subtly called me out because before we were getting ready to podcast, I was like, should I put on a bra or should I just roll with this? And I put on a bra. So am I faking it right now? Like, did I did I step it up too much that I'm putting out a fake persona now? I don't know.
No. I mean, we do video and it lives forever. So if you wouldn't really want to go out of your home that way, I feel like it's okay to leave your home on a podcast video that way. That's generally where I'm like, if I was going out for something, would I put in this much effort? And if the answer is yeah, at least 50% of the time, then it's fine, in my
Okay, I'm
opinion.
good then.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So, if you're new, we love homeschooling. We love our kiddos. But again, some days are hard. Some days are really freaking hard. And we would just truly rather tell you that up front so that you don't feel like it's just you. You should not feel like you suck at homeschooling when you have a rough day because your favorite podcasters and your favorite influencers and whoever else are like, oh, it's great and homeschooling is wonderful and we never have any regrets and it's always here. It's all the pros and never the cons. I just responded to someone in a Facebook group this last week where I was like, truly, there are not hardly any cons for us. And that's true. But that doesn't change the fact that there are tears and there are struggles and there are days that you're like, for the love of all things holy, sweet child of mine, fruit of my loins, I love you with everything I have. But if you don't sit down and be quiet or get out of my personal space this instant, it could get very ugly in here. And I'm not made for orange jumpsuits. Prison is not my friend.
Hopefully that message got through loud and clear.
Usually it does. The kid knows when the sentence starts with, I love you with all of my heart and soul. It's going to be followed with, but.
He's like, oh, crap. Exactly.
I have officially pushed her too far.
Yeah. Oh, my gosh. Yeah. So it is definitely not just you. We all have rough days, but you can do this and your kids will be amazing and you will find your groove. We promise.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, it's so hard, right? You hear people who've been doing it for a long time. And they're like, it'll be okay. You'll see it. You'll know it. You'll feel it. And it's like, it doesn't feel okay now. How are you sure it's going to be okay? I'm like, it's hard. We totally get that. It is hard to believe that in the early stages, especially if you're a newbie. The other thing that you're going to find here in this space is that we promise to be loud about our values. The world is on fire. Even Fox News just turned in their credentials to the Pentagon because they were like, actually, this dictator thing we've got going on right now, not really working for us. We refuse to bury our heads in the sand right now around all of this stuff, especially because let's be real, most of our listeners are under threat in one way or another. If you identify as a woman, if you have a uterus, if you're a person of color, if you're a member of the LGBTQIA plus community, if you're an immigrant, I mean, seriously, like we could just do an entire 49-minute episode on the list of people who are under threat right now in the United States.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, unless you're a straight white man listening to us, and let's be honest, our podcast streams on a gazillion services, and each one of them provides us with demographic statuses. So if you are a straight white man listening to us, you are 100% welcome here. We're so glad
Yep.
you're here. But you are in the extreme minority because we know what our demographics look like from Spotify and iTunes and YouTube and all that kind of stuff. But if
Yeah.
that's you, you're as safe as it gets right now. Everyone else, we see you. We care. We're in this mess together. We're just doing our best.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's the thing. Yeah, we're doing our best and we're here. But today, right? We've said this before on the podcast. We're going to hopefully offer, right, a brief break from the doom scrolling and the news and the chaos in general. Hopefully, in this space for the next 45 minutes or however long we're going to talk, we can help ease some of your homeschool worries with just some advice and some reassurance. That supportive community, I just feel like that is so missing right now.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone I talk to is like, work is so toxic. Being out in public is so toxic. Trying to drive is awful. We just need more supportive community. So while we get that things are awful and we're definitely using our voice and we're protesting and we're putting out resources around all kinds of important things, the Voter Rights Act, we're doing all of that. But this podcast, this little hour right here for us, let's just be supportive and encouraging. That's what we're going to aim for. All right. So we are going to talk about what it means to be falling behind, or can your kids actually be behind? Where does this mindset come from? Is it a legitimate fear? This is going to be an interesting podcast. If you haven't listened to us a ton, Meagan and I homeschool very differently, and I'm far more academic aggressive, and I look at state standards and we cover all the things, and Meagan is an unschooler. And so it's going to be an interesting episode, but hopefully, no matter where you fall in that spectrum, you're going to hear some things that help reassure you and bring that piece of like, okay, we're doing okay. And maybe we're going to tweak a little this way, or we're going to let go of some of these things, but like, it's okay. Okay. So that's the goal. That said, before we dive into that, we do try to keep every episode real, like we've said. And so we do that with like a weekly update of life and whether or not it's been a total shit show or not. So, Meagan, how's your shit show going?
I feel like the last few weeks I've been like, things are good. It's great. Things are okay. I'm doing things. It's great. This week has not been okay. Right? This week has been really, really rough. We come to the podcast and for the most part, we're really open about what goes on in our lives and all that kind of stuff. And, Amanda's kid has a podcast pseudonym name, and there's just certain things that we hold back. It's very, very slim. We're really pretty open on the podcast about what goes on, but there's just a handful of things that our kids say like, hey, that's not for public consumption or whatever. And of course we honor that. But yeah, so we had a family emergency in the last week that I will not be going into, but it was very, 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 very bad. And so, yeah, that's just kind of where we're at. It has been an entire week of a lot of emergency and kind of the cascade after that emergency and repercussions of that emergency and all of that. And so it was funny because I was thinking before the podcast that my brain is like pea soup and I'm just like really, really tired. And I feel like I haven't connected with Amanda that much because I've been in my own existence, just kind of trying to keep my head above water. And I was like, I'm going to have to explain to Amanda like how disastrous my brain is right now and how everything takes me 10 times longer than it normally does. And I'm not thinking as clearly as I normally do. And I'm like, how am I going to explain this to her? And then I'm like, wait a second. Amanda has chronic illness and she has like chronic fatigue and all sorts of neurological things that come with her chronic illness. And I'm like, this is how Amanda lives all the time. I don't have to freaking explain this to Amanda. But that's how whacked out my brain was, that it didn't even occur to me that you would know. Like, I can't. My brain is like not connecting A and B and C the way it normally does. So you might hear it today. We'll find out. It might be interesting when I go to edit this episode later and I have to edit out me trying to repeat the same sentence 10 times. We'll find out. But I'm really tired. Like, even after a full night of sleep, I'm still just really, really tired. And, but things are okay. All of my kids are safe and okay and all of that. So we shall move forward. But there were some highlights in the week. I stocked up on ingredients, which has made me very, very happy. So normally when we would move in the US, our pantry stuff could go with us because the moving company would take it and whatnot. This time we took nothing. So, it's silly things like you don't realize the stuff that you have in your house, like baking soda or cinnamon, things that just most households have at the ready, maybe used it once and it's just been sitting in there. Maybe it's something you use all the time, but it's just like, I haven't had any of that stuff in so long. And so this past week, I decided to make Sneaky Chef has this recipe for breakfast cookies, which I've kind of hacked a little bit. And I've added like chia seeds to ours and hemp and like all kinds of stuff. But I went out and I bought those things. I bought baking soda and, all that vanilla, all that kind of stuff. So I was like, okay, so it's just like, it feels a little bit more homey and a little bit more settled. And my kiddo was like, breakfast cookies, right? So that was exciting. Yeah, I'm reading a pretty B-rate book, but I'm pretty sucked into it. I think because my brain's not really functioning at full speed, that like I'm okay with the fact that the book kind of sucks. So I'm okay with that. I've read a couple of good books recently, like really good books. And so I was like, I'm going to stick with this B-rate book. That's okay. And I'm going to IKEA tomorrow. And I love IKEA. So I'm going to go I don't need much. I need like a whisk that's not metal. I need stupid stuff, but I'm still pretty excited about it. It's going to be a fun outing. So I'll take it. Yeah.
Yeah. Nice.
How about you? What's going on in your world?
Well, now you understand why I read so many crap books, because when your brain is like pea soup, the idea of like trying to read a really good book, it's actually kind of overwhelming. Like, it's just like, I just want something that is kind of easy and I get lost in, but also if I don't really remember it, I'm not like, oh man, like I got to go back and reread that. Yeah, it was fine. It was
Yeah.
enjoyable. Like, yep, yep. So
Yeah, this one's pretty cheesy, but I'm like, I'm in it to win it. I can't wait to see how it ends. So
nice. Nice. There you go. You know, I feel like I'm kind of a broken record these weeks too, lately. Like we had an amazing trip recently, some world schooling stuff, but the reality is I just really need more than one normal regular week in a row. Like I need a string of 3 or 4 boring old school weeks. We are really struggling to get the hang of like middle school level work and time management and free time and social time, and I know that the middle school transition and struggle is fairly universal, but it still sucks. So, yeah. I mean, I think, yeah, a few regular, boring back-to-back weeks are penciled in for our family in like 12 or 13 weeks. So we got to get there. I got to get through like all of the holiday season, and then maybe we can just hibernate in our home for January or something. I don't know. We'll see how that works out. But also, like the big highlight, no, low light. Is that a thing? Can you have a low light?
in your
Yeah, the big.
hair. Yeah.
Well, it kind of applies to my hair because we don't have warm water. And it's been going on. Well, technically we have lukewarm water, but we definitely
Oh,
have no hot water. It's been going on for a few days now. And like, let's be real, it makes me pretty pissy for a lot of reasons. One of them being I do really like to take warm showers. And for me, they make a huge difference in my daily pain levels. It's part of like my
yeah.
pain management and whatever else. So yeah, I'm here. We fly out tomorrow to go visit family, and nothing is slowing down. And I will power through because that's what I do. But I really hope to power through with a warm shower. And if not, at least my parents will for sure have warm water. So I feel bad for anyone who gets too close to me at the airport tomorrow. But yeah, we're
Yeah.
here. I'm here. I'm here, and we're going to podcast. So there you go. Listen to our damn podcast.
I feel like I used to, and I've really worked to get better at this. where something would come up, right? Somebody would say, "Hey, do you want to do this thing?" Or there's an event or a field trip or a show or whatever. And I'd be like, "Oh, yeah." And I would look at the calendar and we were free that day or that weekend or whatever it was. But I was really not good at looking at the week or two before and the week or two after to see how it fit into the bigger picture. And so I
Yeah.
ended up consistently kind of screwing myself where I would say, "Oh yeah, we're free that day," and I didn't realize that the 3 days before we had this huge thing, or the 4 days after we had this, and then I was like, "Oh my gosh, like I didn't figure out how this fit into the larger picture." And so I've really worked to like get better at doing that because sometimes it's hard when you end up in one of those seasons where it's like boom, 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 and you just can't quite get back up in between. I'm not saying I'm
Yep.
great at it. I still do it sometimes, but I try. It's like something that I at least try to focus on.
Yeah. No, I
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So today we will be talking about the idea of falling behind. And to Amanda's point, we homeschool very, very differently. So we'll see kind of where we end up on this. Some things we'll probably overlap on and some things we probably won't, which is A-okay. So falling behind, right? How often do we hear this? I don't want my kids to fall behind. I'm nervous that they're going to fall behind. I pulled them out of school and they are behind. And so now I
Mhm.
have to catch them up and all this kind of stuff. So I think it's important for us to realize that the behind comes from the public school standard because it's not universal where every kid in every country around the world or even every state within the United States is working on the same metric or the same timeline, the same set of standards. So that's kind of step one, but it's whatever the conditioning is in your area or from your education that you had as a child, whatever the public school system is doing, whatever your siblings' kids are doing in the same public school system or in their public school system. And so we kind of have that comparison point. Like that's where the behind thing is coming from. So we'll talk about that a bit today as far as what that looks like and all of that. I will say, as an unschooler, I do struggle a bit with this. There's a range of ways to homeschool, unschooling being on the far end of one of the ranges, whether it's the far left or the far right or whatever. And Amanda's probably way closer to the other end of the spectrum than I am. But then even within unschooling, you still have a range again. And so you have a range of people who unschool who are kind of providing support and some scaffolding and coaching and development and stuff, still very child led. The kids are calling the shots. Their opinions are counted, how they tell you that they want to learn, what they tell you they're interested in, all of that is accounted for. But then beyond that, it's like, okay, well, how do we want to grow and how do we want to do this and how do we want to do that? And let's set some goals around that, maybe. What would you like to achieve and stuff like that. There are other people within the unschooling community who aren't approaching unschooling that way. And we try within our community here very, very, very hard not to judge. I think it's human nature in some cases to look at something and go, oof, right? And then you have to have a moment and be like, it's not my place to judge. Those are not my kids. This is not my family, etc. But I have joined radical unschooling groups where we see kids who are 8, 9, 10 years old who are not potty trained because the parents are waiting for the kids to figure it out entirely on their own. They're not putting in that scaffolding or that support or any of those things, or providing the tools to kind of nudge them along in some way, shape, or form. And again, maybe I'm doing it wrong. I don't know. Like, I'm not saying they're wrong, but that's just not the way we've approached it, right? You'll see kids who are 12, 13, 14 who are still struggling to learn to read. And there's not a lot of active engagement from the parents saying, here's how we might approach this, or again, kind of just trying to support and provide resources or tools or discuss with the kids how they'd like to grow in that sense. So it's tough. It's tough from this perspective because a lot of times you see in homeschool groups like there's no such thing as behind, right? And in some ways that's valid, right? But then if you have a kid who you're just waiting for them to learn to read and they're 17 years old and they still don't know how to read, like that's kind of behind. Like, am I wrong in saying that that's kind of behind?
I mean, I think what it really comes down to is you have to have an understanding of where your kid wants to fit into society as a whole,
Mm,
and you have to have an understanding of where they're likely to fit into society as a whole. Because just because your kid wants to fit into society as a whole as a video streamer, like a gamer on YouTube, and that's how they're going to make their millions and they'll never have to do any, like, realistically, is that what we're really going to hang all of our hopes on? And that's all we're going to worry about, making sure they know how to stream on YouTube? Like, probably not. As the parent, hopefully you're being a little bit more like, okay, well, let's like look at what a plan B and a plan C might look like and what we might do to help with that.
I
And
kid
so
you not, when you said have an idea of where your kids want to go. And I was like, I was literally like, yeah, but 90% of them want to be YouTubers. So I was like, right, because the YouTubers make it look so easy.
exactly.
And it's like, so I
Mhm.
was like, well, that's kind of tough. But in a child-led environment, are we supposed to just let them, you know what I mean? That's where the
Mhm.
struggle is, because for us, that's not the approach we've taken to unschooling. And I should say too, by the way, when I said before, if you have a kiddo who's 17 years old and not reading, et cetera, I'm not talking about a child with learning differences, with neurodevelopmental differences, with learning delay. I am not talking about that scenario. I'm talking about just
Yeah,
a kid who's been left to their own devices to learn to read and has not put those puzzle pieces together on their own. So I just want to make that clear,
absolutely. Yeah.
because there's nothing
Even
wrong with a kiddo who has delays and things, who's plugging along and doing their thing. Awesome sauce.
even with the potty training comment, right? There are
Yeah.
100% 8, 9, 10-year-olds who are not
Yes.
fully potty trained. Not because of parental neglect, not
Correct.
because the parents are like, "Hey, you're, neurotypical and it's totally fine to be 10 and pooping your pants at the playground," right? No one's going to make fun of you when that happens. That's a very different sort of story and situation.
Uh-huh.
But so, I mean, I think it's kind of, back to my original point, is that idea that, like, it depends on where you want your kids to fit into society. If you envision a world where your kids are going to go to college or a trade school, and you envision them doing that at a more typical age of late teens or early adulthood, then there is an element of being behind, because they do need to have a set number of fundamental foundational skills to be able to do that on that timeline and in that time frame. If you are off-grid homesteaders and you know for sure that your kids are passionate about doing that and that's what they want to do, then your skills are going to look very different than someone who lives in the city and plans to go to college at 17 or 18 and follow that kind of path. Where your targets and your goals are very different. And so I think from that regard, there is an element of behind, and whether we like it or not, for probably a majority, I don't know if it's a vast majority, but a more than 50% majority, there is kind of a nebulous idea of where society in general is at a certain point. And if you want to be a part of that society, you have to be there in general as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And so that's kind of where I struggle, right? Is we're not hooked on state standards and making sure that in fourth grade they can do A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Like, these are the steps that they have to do at 8 years old, 10 years old, 12 years old. But at the same time, there is this component of preparing them for the real world. So finding that balance of what that looks like. So I think the idea of this fear of falling behind comes from, like we said, mass education. You can't have an entire building full of kids going to school and treat them all as individuals. You just can't. The elementary school that my kids were zoned for when we lived in Florida had 1,600 children in it. You can't treat those kids as individuals. You have to treat them in groups and in categories. And you have to assign standards based upon age, because how else are you going to clump these kids together? You can't have 1,600 individuals. You need, these are the 8-year-olds, and the 8-year-olds are all doing this thing. So it's not factoring in interest. It's not factoring in readiness. It's not factoring in neurotype. So that's where that comes from. And homeschooling can and usually should look different than the one size fits all. We've talked about the one size fits all.
Mhm.
So it's finding that balance between, in my eyes at least anyway, between preparing them and nurturing them and developing them and growing them for us without necessarily being stuck on they have to be doing this at a certain age or else I have failed, they have failed, we're all doomed, they're never going to become anything in this world. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I do. I totally agree with that. I think for me, because we do homeschool, but we homeschool with an eye towards a more typical, I don't know if typical or traditional, I'm not really sure the best word for it, a more typical, like, life forward. We're not a family of entrepreneurs. Hello, homeschool moms unfiltered and all of the stuff that comes along with it. I'm constantly like, oh my God, it's too much work. Like, I don't want to have to hustle all the time. Like, we're not that family, right? Like, we do like to be creative, but like we just, yeah. And so, that's gonna mean that what it looks like for us is going to be different. And and that's okay, right? And we'll talk more about what that looks like and how that fits into this idea of being behind, because while I do, as the aggressive academic homeschooler, I do believe that there is a point that objectively people can say, I mean, yeah, you're behind and you do need to catch up if you want to do X, Y, or Z. I also believe that it is not the point where the vast majority of us think it is.
Yeah. That's a great way of putting that. I like that. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So, okay, so let's talk about some of the flaws or potential flaws in the behind thought process. So, I kind of alluded to it earlier, but standards vary wildly. So, there are those books like think of what every second grader needs to know, what every sixth grader needs to know. According to who? I mean,
Yeah.
the standards vary by state tremendously. They vary by school district, even within a state. They certainly vary internationally. We've talked about that numerous times. We have an entire course about preschool and kindergarten and what that looks like outside of the United States and how other countries are doing it way better than the United States is. So if you are homeschooling a kiddo age 6 or under, 100% check that out because the standards in the US are not age or developmentally appropriate for those kids. I mean, in Finland, we have kids who are not starting school until ages 6 or ages 7, and they're surpassing the US kids in no time. It does not take long, even though we're like, we've got them copying their name down at the age of 5. Finland's like, ours are splashing in mud puddles at the age of 5. So the standards vary wildly. But then, even within a classroom, you have, generally speaking, a 12-month swing in a classroom. And 12 months is a huge, huge deal in a kindergarten classroom, a first grade classroom, even eighth grade, ninth grade, puberty is coming into play and all of that. 12 months is a really big shift among kids. So, and that's not even taking into account, which we'll talk about, like neurotypes and neurodivergence and things like that. But just in general, you have a kid who just made the cutoff and you have a kid who just missed the cutoff to have gone a year ahead. Those kids are going to be different and not even evenly. Right. So let's say, for example, you have 6 kids that just missed the cutoff and 6 kids who just made the cutoff. You might have some of the 6 who just made the cutoff and they're wildly ahead. And then you might have some on the other end of the spectrum who need plenty of additional support. And that's okay too. So yeah, they're not all built the same.
Well, yeah. And there are lots of ways to look at it and talk about it. And it's come up in many, many podcasts before this. But a great example, if you follow the news at all, Los Angeles, LA Unified just put out this big press release. And there's been all of this coverage about the fact that they're like, yay, our state standard scores are finally increasing again. Like we had been seeing them improving before COVID. And then with COVID, they took a huge hit. And now this is the first year after COVID that we're seeing them like increasing again. And we're really happy about that. And it's going great. And yes, that is a wonderful thing. The kids in public education, absolutely, we hope they're doing well. The reality is none of the kids who met state standard average, it was still less than 50% in like the best category. And then there's one category where only like 23% of the kids met the state standard, and they're like, yay, they're improving. And like, so even by their own metrics, they're not all where they want them to be. So keep that in mind when you're doing this, like, oh well, they're behind. Like, well, I mean, yes, by some m- arbitrary metric, in many ways that's out there, and 75% of their peers are also behind. So then, really, if 75% of the kids are quote unquote behind, are they really behind, or are they closer to where they should be? And we're just unrealistic about where we've set this metric. So
That's a
it's
valid
important to
point.
keep that in mind.
Yeah, that's so true. Oh my goodness. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be really, really hard to take all 7-year-olds and say every single 7-year-old should be doing this thing. And then you, as a homeschool parent, being like, my one single 7-year-old should be doing the same thing as every 7-year-old in the entire world. It's just not possible. I mean, some kids read early but struggle with emotional regulation. Others are emotionally mature but slower to read. And so it's just a matter of kind of looking at your individual child. And the school system cannot look at individual children. It just can't. It's the numbers are too big. I often like to use other medical conditions or disease states or something like that when we're doing comparisons. So I'm in this ADHD parenting group, and all the time there's these posts that are like, we really don't want to medicate and blah, blah, blah. And listen, you have to do what's comfortable for your family and maybe try things before you start medication and see if those things work, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of variables at play. But you'll see people who are like, we've tried everything and our kid is struggling and blah, blah, blah. Like, what sort of supplements can I use? And it's like, if your kid had type 1 diabetes, would you be having these conversations about insulin? Like, your kid would already be on insulin. And so I usually like to kind of compare to some of those things. So it's the same thing. Like, if your kid was behind in losing teeth, it's okay for the most part. I mean, there's a certain point you're going to ask the dentist questions, and they're going to, okay, look, we've looked. There's nothing. I'm not concerned. Some kids are just a little bit later than others, right? So, I mean, you're doing your dental visits, you're doing your due diligence as a parent, but if they say it's okay, just give it a little bit of time. We can do the same thing when it comes to reading. If you've kind of dotted your I's and crossed your T's, and you've checked eyes and vision's okay, and you've done some of these things, and it's like, okay, they're making progress, they're getting there. We're allowed to do that. We're allowed to treat them as individuals and let them continue to grow on that journey.
Yeah. I laugh because the teeth thing, we actually have a good friend whose kiddo is like years behind in losing teeth. Like, his mouth has no interest in growing grown-up teeth. And they had to go and do all kinds of testing and assessments and do all of this stuff to be like, is there a problem? Do we need to remove the baby teeth for him so the grown-up teeth can come in? Are the grown-up teeth just not there and ready to join the party? Like,
Yeah.
what is going on? And at the end of the day, it was that thing of like, well, everything looks fine. So we'll keep an eye on it, maybe a little bit more frequently than someone else might. And it
Right.
seems like it'll come when it comes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had my youngest was that kid. And so most of his baby teeth ended up needing to be pulled and they'd come out with full roots on them. I mean, just like they weren't going anywhere. It was the craziest thing. But the funniest thing was, I love the fact that we have pediatric dentists now. Like, when we were kids, that
Mm.
wasn't a thing. And I am just like petrified of the dentist, and I'm petrified of needles and all this stuff. And my kids are like, the dentist is amazing. And I'm like, yeah, because you have a pediatric freaking dentist where they give you like a token for the machine where you get a treat and whatever. I'm like, yeah, we didn't get any of that. So it was hilarious. He had this amazing pediatric dentist when we lived in North Carolina. And the dentist was like, he didn't say in front of him, we need to pull them, anything like that. So, but I knew what we were going back for. And so I was like, pump a lot of gas into that kid, please. Like, just give him all the gas, right? Let's just do all that stuff. And so the dentist was like, I have this wiggle tester that tests your teeth to see if they're wiggly enough. And he goes, sometimes they just fall right out when I use my wiggle tester. And he's like, I'm going to give your teeth sleepy juice medicine, which was Novocaine, and like all the, I mean, he was really little at this point. And he's sitting there watching Cars up on some big television. And the dentist is like doing it, and he's got the gas going. I'm like, breathe deeply, child. And the dentist just like pops the teeth out, whatever. And part of the challenge, as we learned going forward, was when some kids get wiggly teeth, they start wiggling them themselves with their fingers, with their tongue, whatever. Because he's autistic, he didn't like the sensation of wiggly teeth. It was like really, really, really unnerving. And so
Yeah,
he
my
wouldn't
kiddo
touch
would
them. He
not
wouldn't
wiggle.
chew.
Yep.
Yeah. No. And
The number of
so,
shark teeth we had because he
yeah.
refused to wiggle. And it was like, look, the other one's going to come in and this one has to come out. So you can either help it or it's going to be a lot worse. Yep.
And so it was hilarious because going forward, he was like, I don't want to wiggle any of my teeth. He's like, can't we just go to Dr. Buddy's and use the wiggle tester? Because they all just fell out the last time. And I was like, in the back of my head, I'm like, yeah, for like $250 a tooth, kid. Like,
Yeah.
you know,
That was it. We got the assessment for how much it was going to cost to help them along, help those shark teeth along. And my husband was like, "You better start wiggling, kid."
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, let's see if we can do that, please. Okay. Yeah. But he did. He had quite a few pulled, but like, oh my gosh, right? But yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
So back to kiddos and learning. Anyway, yeah, I mean, the thing is, and you've probably experienced this with your kiddo too, Amanda, but learning typically isn't linear with kids. They kind of have these ebbs and it's like growth spurts,
Oh,
physical growth spurts. And learning can much be the same, where there are these ebbs and flows, there are these bursts, and then there are these kind of lull periods. Have you had that too?
no, absolutely. And in fact, because I did not think we were going to talk about this during the show, I did not go back and look up any of the actual information. So I'm going to be talking off the cuff here and I will not recall any names. But there was someone who was involved at a major university, maybe Harvard or Stanford or one of those. And they had this whole theory about the fact that kids have physical growth spurts and they have mental growth spurts, and they happen kind of like twice a year, but especially the 3 months before their birthday. And it talked about the fact that like they tend to have a lot more dysregulation and they're a lot more clumsy and they're just not retaining things as well. And then once their birthday hits, like everything kind of settles. And now they've had this massive like mental acuity jump forward. And I was like, they say that it goes, all the way through growth and development, like they have this series of books that talk about development at each age and whatever. It was really hard for me to get my hands on him, but I did because it so applied to my kiddo. He was like a textbook. When he was little, there was that book called like the Wonder Years, or not Wonder Years, Wonder something. And it had like the leap months and the sleep regressions, and you could all of this stuff. And he was the textbook that. And then as he got older, he was the textbook of this other philosophy. I mean, like the 3 months before his birthday are like always such a hot mess, even as a tween, like,
Interesting.
and then, and also, like I'm constantly waiting for the next broken bone or that, like whatever that's going to look like, because it's just, like all arms and legs. And, and you're like, you didn't even think about that. Like 3 months ago, you would have totally thought that through and not done that. Like, what is happening?
That is
But yeah,
interesting.
it seems like a regression. And you're like, for the love of all things, why? Like,
Yeah.
and and then in a couple of months, it's like this huge leap, and like things are just clicking and they're like so much more mature all of a sudden. And you're like, wait a minute, what happened here? Like, not only are you more mature than you were 6 months ago, but you're significantly more mature than you were 2 months ago. Like, so yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, isn't that interesting? I'll have to see
Yeah.
if I can find the info on that. We could always share it on our social channels or something if we can go back and dig in and find it. But yeah, right. And so I think we can force through those periods that you're talking about, like the rough patches of those periods, and we can all end up in tears, create a lot of frustration, bring our kids a little bit closer to burnout, or we can just kind of ebb and flow with those cycles. Now, if you
Yeah.
never have the growth and development cycle that you're waiting for, it might be worth checking with people. It
Yeah.
might be worth getting evaluations and things like that. But if you're seeing that pattern, it's okay to have those lulls in those patterns and then wait for the big boom and wait for everything to connect all at one time. Right. So yeah.
Yeah.
It helps, and it decreases anxiety for you and your kids if you're not kind of pushing through those things. It keeps your kids' confidence intact where they're not kind of struggling during some of those really rough periods to do things. If you're kind of in a maintenance period, it might be a little bit better for their confidence and things like that. Yeah, and just like turn the pressure valve down a little bit. I like that. That's cool.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Okay, so we have more to talk about, but we do want to remind you that we've got a giveaway going on. So we mentioned it before in a couple of previous episodes, but we are doing a giveaway. It will end the end of this month, which is October 31st, 2025, in case you're listening later. You will be able to pick your choice of one of our unit study bundles. So we have these bundles you can buy on Teachers Pay Teachers, and it's 3 of our unit studies bundled together. They cover really awesome topics, social justice and I don't know, animal preservation, all kinds of interesting things. And you get to pick one of those. And then you also get a copy of Meagan's new book, which is called 101 Ways to Overcome Homeschool Objections. So everything from, like we're nice and we're sharing tea to like we're not nice and we're throwing tea. So it's a lot of fun. If you're interested, there's a Google form to fill out. The link will be in our show notes here. And if you're following us, if you're a Patreon member, it's there in Patreon as well. You can easily find it there. So it's all good. Go join. It's fun. It's an easy giveaway. We realized we hadn't done any giveaways in a while. And we're like, oh, we need to
Yeah.
get back to that. Everyone likes free stuff, especially these days. We all need to pick me up. So we're gonna get better about that. We're gonna get better about doing them a little more frequently.
Yes, we will, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So back to behind, discussion of behind. We kind of circled the idea earlier about neurodiversity and neurodevelopment differences and things like that. But that is 100% going to affect the speed, the cadence, the timing of when a child learns certain things and how they relate to some of those metrics that are out there. So when we're talking about neurodivergent kids, if the terminology is new to you, we're talking ADHD, dyslexia, autism, Tourette's, things like that. All of that fits in OCD. All of those things fit in there. And yeah, they're going to affect the timelines that your kids learn on. I will 100% go out on a limb and say that the public school standards are not weighted to take those kids into account because my own kids went to public school for a very short period of time and there was nothing neurodivergent affirming about that experience. So I can pretty much guarantee you that they haven't been like, oh, well, these are the standards, but now let's skew them a little bit to make sure that everyone can succeed on this metric that we've created. So if you are working with kiddos that have these diagnoses, yeah, their timing is going to be different. Right? Their thought process is going to be different. The linear path that they take to get to things is going to be wildly different if your kids are anything like mine. I always like to say some of my kids take an over the river and through the woods approach to getting somewhere, but they love the journey. So I'm like, have at it, right?
Yeah.
So
And
there's
if
nothing
they're
that said the
happy,
straight line was correct.
no, exactly. And if they're happy to get there when they finally get there, then, great. If your kiddo is taking an over the river and through the woods approach and they're like stopping at the river and never going through the woods, then it's probably time to have a discussion about like, how do we streamline this approach so we do actually get through the woods? But if you've got a kiddo who is super happy to take that approach and then they're like excited when they get at the end, like, perfect, make it work,
Exactly.
figure it out.
Yep.
Yeah. Yep.
I've talked about it before on the podcast, but I had to find my youngest kid a new math class because he's wildly gifted in math. But he would get so annoyed because he was in a math class geared towards neurotypical kids. And the teacher was like, this is how you solve these problems. And he was like, that's how you solve these problems. That's not how I solve these problems. And he's like, I got there faster than you and I got the right answer. So I'm not really sure why you're so stuck on your method. And so I had to find him a neurodivergent teacher who was neurodivergent affirming, who was like, I'll work with you. However you're going to get there and however you're going to do things, we're good. We're going to make this work. So I'm like, all right, kiddo, thanks. So yeah, the beauty of homeschooling is that when you have a kid whose brain is wired differently, you get to work with their wiring instead of constantly trying to fight against their wiring, which is a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. But you did mention, Amanda, like if you're never getting through the river and through the woods, that there might be a need to do something. Right? So we keep talking through this episode about it's a balancing act and this and that. And it's like, okay, well, I'm trying to balance, but I don't know what I'm balancing and when I'm supposed to go. Enough balancing. We need to do something here. So how do you know? What are the red flags? How do you know when it's time to address things? Okay. So it is completely typical for kids to develop unevenly. Completely typical. Okay. But sometimes delays can represent something that is beneath the surface. And that's probably the hardest part of this whole conversation for me is when do you know when to let them plug along and develop at their own pace versus when is it time to figure out what the heck is going on under the surface? Do you
Yeah.
kind of find that to be a a struggle point in some ways?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, and it's going to be different for each person, but for me, I think kids are a lot smarter than we give them credit for. And I also think they're a lot harder on themselves than we realize.
Yes.
And so for me, my thing is as soon as you hear your kiddo giving themselves any kind of grief or negative self-talk about, well, I can't figure this out, like, oh, I'm dumb, I can't figure this out, or everyone else can do this and I can't, so I'm dumb. Anytime any of that kind of stuff starts coming up, like it's time to go and check and and get real serious about talking with your pediatrician, evaluations, that kind of stuff. Because if you've read any parenting book at all out there, you've heard the thing about like, oh, you have to do 7 positive things for every negative thing. If you allow your kiddo to have years of this negative self-talk, you are fighting an almost impossible uphill battle to undo that when you find out what was going on. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. I think that that's valid advice. And we've talked on the podcast before about how difficult it is to get evaluations for
Yeah.
kids if you're trying to discover learning differences, how expensive they are, how long wait lists are. We understand all of that. We do. And it stinks. It's almost in my mind, because I'm not a curriculum person, in my mind, I'm like, I'd put money towards an evaluation before I would spend a boatload of money on curriculum if you think there's an issue, if you think that there's something that you need, because otherwise you can spend a fortune on curriculum and have it not be the right fit for your child. And a lot of times you'll walk away from an evaluation with so much more insight and suggestions from that evaluator that then you can go forward and buy curriculum. But I think if you do have a kiddo who's having those negative self-talk conversations and who's struggling in that way, save every penny you can on curriculum and do something super budget and squirrel that money away until you can get an evaluation. And then you'll have a clearer path going forward for whatever you can possibly do. So yeah, that makes perfect sense. I like that. So generally speaking, a green flag, we just talked about red flags, but a green flag you could look for is progress. Okay. So in my world, it doesn't have to be aligned with the state standards. Amanda, you can say whatever works best in your world, but in my world, I don't really give a shit what the public school is doing. But if you see visible changes, you see that they're guessing at stuff less often, you see that they're more accurately decoding words, you see that their resistance level is going down to doing certain things, you see that they're able to recall a math fact more automatically than they were before. All of these things are like, okay, I don't care if they're on some sort of outlined timeline of what they're supposed to do at age 7, age 9, age 11, but those are things that I'm looking for. And those to me are like, yes, those are our victory things. So I think absolutely. And it shows that steady upward trend where you're kind of being able to measure that they're growing in that way. So I think that that's kind of the green flag that I'm looking for. How are you measuring progress? If because you're not a tester, even though you're a traditional homeschooler, you're not testing and scoring and all that kind of stuff. So how are you measuring progress and making sure your kiddo's growing?
Yeah. So I'm going to be honest. We do have to do benchmark assessments and state testing because of the program that we're in here in California. So I do have it easy in that regard. My kiddo has an annual state test. I see that. He's always doing really well with that. And so I'm like, well, what we're doing is fine. It's working fine. And I don't need to do any extra additional testing or worry about testing and grades and things like that throughout the year because going without it, he's still doing fine on this objective metric that is questionable, but still at least I know he's doing well. He's always the 98th, 99th percentile and so that's fine. I think for me the biggest thing is I kind of said it earlier in the episode, but the vast majority of parents who are really worried about their kiddo being behind are worried about it too early in the process. So if you have just pulled your kiddo out of school or you are just starting the process of homeschooling and you're like, oh, they're behind. We need to do all of these things and push and this and that. Like, it's too soon to be worried about that. First, you need to slow way down and figure out how your kiddo likes to learn, figure out what lights your kiddo up, figure out how you're going to find the balance with homeschooling at home and you as the parent and as the teacher or the caregiver and the teacher and just figure all of those things out and do kind of like this slow roll into learning and academics at home. If you dive in and you try to do all of it and you try to make up all of this lost ground that you think you've got, the only thing you're going to do is make your kid hate you and hate academics and hate learning and think that school is terrible and all of these kinds of things. And so I'm just such a big believer in the fact that even if you think your kid is quote unquote behind, maybe because they're in third grade and you pulled them out of public school and they were part of the 75% that didn't meet standards in their classroom or whatever the case may be, just take that break and lay that foundation. And laying that foundation really can take a year or two. And that's okay. Because the reality is, once you lay that really solid foundation and you do it in a nice, slow, intentional manner, focused on lighting up your child and sparking a real love of learning in your child, going forward, your progress is going to be significantly more obvious on a significantly more regular basis. And you're going to have the 2 steps forward way more often than you're going to have the 1 step back. And for me,
Mm-hmm.
that's where you're finding that progress. That's what you're getting to. And if you've been doing that for 3 or 4 years and you're at this point, like I do think that 3 or 4 years in, if you've got that good pattern established and all of that, that you should be able to see something that looks equivalent to a year to a year and a half's worth of like standard progress each year as a homeschooler, a homeschool family doing things. And that matters again if your kiddo has a plan of kind of going out and integrating into a more typical world, if they want to be at a level where they can do the things with same age peers, then that matters. And if they're not that kiddo, then again, it's just about the progress. Progress is progress. And the amount of progress and where you need that progress to be at depends wholly on the ultimate goals of in your family and for your kiddo. And those have to be fairly closely aligned because if they're not, your kiddo isn't going to be doing it. And then you're going to feel like you're behind because they're not actually learning at the rate and level that they're capable of learning at.
Mm-hmm.
That's my 2 cents. or
It was like
or
5 cents,
15
I feel like.
cents. Yeah.
It was very valuable, but it was maybe more than 2 cents, but I liked it. I was there for it. So oh my gosh,
man.
I'm telling you.
So we have some final thoughts and our mantra, but before we do that, we have finally decided next book club, it's coming up. We're almost done with our last book. So the first Monday of November, we'll start a new book and we are doing The Anxious Generation. So it should be a good kind of middle ground. We got several different suggestions. Some people just messaged us. Some people voted on our thing on Patreon. But I think it's going to be a good middle ground for everyone and the concerns that we all have. The Anxious Generation. So you can pick that up. We'll have a picture of the front of it so you know what book you're looking for and a link to it and all that good jazz on our social media and probably here in the show notes and whatever else. But if you're interested, brings up a great point. We do that in our Patreon now. Come join our Patreon. Having a solid community, whether it's to worry about the anxious generation and screen time and bullying and social media and all of that stuff, or it's because you're worried about this behind and you're like, it's really great that Meagan doesn't think a kid can ever be behind. And it's really great that Amanda thinks you don't worry about it until you've been homeschooling for 4 or 5 years. But how do I get there? Right? Come join us. We have lives. We have the book club, we have chat communities. We're so happy to help, and our community is full of great supportive people, and they're happy to share their personal experience as well. So just come. join us. There's a totally free option. There are different paid levels that give you different levels of live meetings and frequency and all of that jazz. But yeah, it's a great community, and we are so happy to support you. So yeah, hopefully we'll see you over on Patreon.
Oh, yeah, we would love that. I'm looking forward to that book because you see the statistics about how anxious kids and teens and tweens are and all. And it's like, how do we put these horses back in the barn? Like, this is not good. This is just
Yeah.
not good. So, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So, some final thoughts. I mean, I think it's twofold here, right? The first being that I can't speak for Amanda, but I would love for you to walk away from this episode kind of with the ability to recognize that being late to learning something doesn't mean your kid is lazy. It doesn't mean your kid is doomed for failure. It doesn't mean they have no future. It doesn't mean you suck at homeschooling. Okay. None of these things are necessarily true. We
Yeah.
did say there is a point where you might have to get an evaluation. You might have to give a kick in the pants. You might have to do one of these things to kind of nudge that kiddo forward with whatever supports or structure that they need. But they do not have to do it on the exact same standard that the kids on your block are doing it at just because they go to school and just because you are homeschooling. So it's okay.
Yeah.
The other thing there, kind of a twofold message to take away, is that catching a problem early is empowering. It gives you the tools that you need. It's like getting the code to unlocking your child. It is not shameful to diagnose something. It is not shameful to go and get some help and ask for some support. So it's that balancing act of giving them the time, but looking for those signs, those frustration signs, that negative self talk, and then putting those support structures in place if they need. But if your kiddo is just plugging along and making progress and growing and they're doing their thing and they're loving learning, it's okay.
Yeah, a diagnosis is not I cannot we've done entire podcasts about this, but a diagnosis is not a bad thing. And if that is needed to help your kiddo, there's no I don't think I, anytime I say no one, there's always someone who comes in the comments and is like, "Well, actually," right? But I cannot imagine there's anyone out there that is like, "Well, it is unfortunate for you that you think you need glasses to be able to read, but glasses are so shameful and we are
Yeah.
not getting glasses. Like you figure that out without
Try
glasses,
harder.
right?" Yeah. Yes. You just focus more, right? Like it's just like, come on. It's the exact same thing. The supports look different, the tools and all of that kind of stuff. They look different. They're not a pair of glasses necessarily, though they might be a pair of glasses. It's the same idea. It's you need it to be able to read well. And there's no shame in that. But it is pretty silly to be like, well, I can't do this thing very well. And there are all of these supports and tools out there that could help me do it really well. But I mean, I'm not going to use them. I mean, well, you
How
know,
embarrassing.
yeah, right. Like your glasses are fine. Maybe just find better frames. Okay. So all of that said, we do have a mantra for you this week. And we're going to keep it short and sweet because that's what's important every once in a while. Instead of worrying about quote unquote behind, focus on progress. Short and sweet.
Short and sweet. I
Progress.
love it.
Yep.
All right, peeps, come chat with us on Patreon. We can help. We promise. We can get you putting one foot in front of the other and feeling confident and give you ideas that you probably haven't even thought of. So happy to continue the discussion over there. But in the meantime, happy homeschooling.
Yeah. Have a great one.